and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In February of 2016, I was a married local school board member working a part-time IT job. Without health insurance and underemployed, I was a small D Democrat who was feeling a little left out of Obama's hope and change narrative and hadn't heard a lot about any real challenge to Hillary's campaign. Bernie was on my radar, but only as a long shot. Then I hear about a member of the DNC with so much integrity that she resigns her position to support and endorse that underdog candidate. I am excited, and that is when Tulsi came onto my radar. It was then that I realized that to be a good Democrat was not to just drink the Kool-Aid, but to get involved and work to change the flavor, and I have ever since. Fast forward to December 2018, and I hear that Tulsi Gabbard will be in Claremont at the Addiction Recovery Center on the square here in town. After the event, I was talking with some folks about how impressed I was with Tulsi and that I predicted great things for her future. A gentleman named Ray Alt overheard our conversation, popped his trunk, and offered us bumper stickers and pins weeks before she announced, and I've been following her ever since. It is my honor to present to you the representative from Hawaii's 2nd District, Major in the Hawaii Army National Guard, two-time combat veteran in Iraq and Afghanistan, and candidate for President of the United States, Tulsi Gabbard.
Please give John a round of applause, please. Thank you so much. It is great to be here in Claremont. It's wonderful to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I'd like to say a couple of other thank yous here before we start our conversation. Tessa Daniels, who's here in the back, wave her hand. And are you Jen or Jess? Jen, who is helping her out. They have taken great care of us and are hosting us here in this space tonight. Thank you very much for your hospitality for all of us. How you doing? I'm good. It's good to be back. It's good to be back. There's a lot to talk about. I'm going to dive straight into it. Something in the headlines today that I think is really important for us to open our conversation on. BBC, Doomsday Clock nears apocalypse. USA Today, hear that ticking, that's doomsday coming. How many of you have heard about this or saw this pop up? A few. All right. Well, I'm glad we're talking about it. It's kind of important. Doomsday Clock moves closest to midnight in its 73-year history. Doomsday Clock lurches to 100 seconds to midnight, closest to catastrophe yet. Every year, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists come together and they assess the threats that we face on this planet and adjust the doomsday clock accordingly. So this announcement was made today after their assessment occurred, and they looked to the decision they made last year, which put us 2 minutes before midnight, and this year made the decision to move that clock even closer, 100 seconds to midnight, 100 seconds to that doomsday catastrophe. I think it's a problem given that we have these scientists who are highly trained and well-researched and who clearly know their stuff, sounding the alarm bells about something that no one else is really talking about or paying much attention to. It seems like it would be on the forefront of every news story and every political leader and every presidential candidate coming and saying, hey, we have a serious existential threat for us here in the United States that threatens our safety and security and the security of people in the world. We've got to do something about that. But unfortunately, that's not what we have, and it should beg the question in all of our minds, why is that? Why is it? I found a quote from former Governor Jerry Brown, former governor of California, former presidential candidate, who's been very focused on the issue of nuclear proliferation. And I want to share a quote from him with you that I think begins to answer this question as to why. He said, quote, "Speaking of danger and destruction is never easy. If you speak the truth, people will not want to listen because it's too awful. It makes you sound like a crackpot. Today we live in a world of vast, deep, and pervasive complacency. We are truly in a dangerous moment, but you would never know that from the president, from Republican leadership, and from Democratic leadership." Governor Brown's been around for a long time, and I agree with his assessment. Really, when you look at how the decisions are being made about what issues are talked about, too often, though the calculus is made, well, let me talk about something that's going to make me more popular or is going to get me more followers or get me more supporters, rather than just speaking the truth of the reality of what we are facing as a country. And if you look too often in the media, it's more about clicks and ratings and viewers than it is simply about speaking the truth. Really, we lose out in all of this. But this is what we're here to change and why I'm raising it here tonight. For those of you like John who have been listening and following what I've been saying for a while, you'll remember that from the very first day I announced my candidacy to run for president, I spoke about this most serious existential threat of nuclear catastrophe and how these increasing tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, the erosion of important treaties negotiated in the past that reduced nuclear proliferation, that reduced these tensions, are increasingly being torn up and thrown in the trash. And how real this threat is. This was a serious instigator. This was a major reason why I decided to run for president in the first place. We had a nuclear wake-up call in Hawaii in 2018. It was something that completely unexpected, but early on a Saturday morning caused all of us, all across Hawaii and people on the mainland as well, to say, we got a serious problem. Early on a Saturday morning, there was an alert that went out from our state civil defense, blasted across every cell phone across the state, across radio stations, that robotic voice on the TV saying, "Missile incoming, seek immediate shelter, this is not a drill." I was not in Hawaii that morning. I was in DC. I was alone. It was almost lunchtime in DC. Sitting down on my couch about to eat a bowl of ramen noodles for lunch when all of a sudden my phone went off and I was sent the alert that everyone in Hawaii had gotten, and my heart dropped. Immediately, like everyone else, I started thinking, where are my parents? Where's my family? Where are my friends and loved ones? Are they home? Where can they go? Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. I'm thinking, where is their shelter? I know exactly where my parents live, and I could not think of a single place where they could go in a moment's time, knowing that when that alert goes out, you know you have roughly 15 minutes to get to wherever you're going to go. And this is what families and people all across Hawaii figured out real quick. We had college students sprinting across campus trying to figure out where is their shelter. There's no sign saying, nuclear fallout shelter. There's no place to go. There were no drills. And they found there was no shelter. There was a father who, there was an iPhone video of him lowering his little girl about your age. How old are you? 8, probably about your age. He was lowering his little girl down a manhole, thinking that that may be the only place that she would be safe, and recording this video of himself in the event that he did not survive. I want to ask you here, if as we were gathered here tonight and our phones started buzzing with that same alert, where would you go? The old sign from like, right, the old, okay. So they took the sign off, probably because it would never have protected anybody in the first place. Right, exactly, exactly. And I think it causes us to be confronted with the reality that if you look past, okay, well, let's say there are these nuclear fallout shelters everywhere, which they're not, within 15 minutes of every location, wherever we may find ourselves. But let's say they were there. So you go in, there's a nuclear fallout shelter. Whether or not that'll protect you from the blast is debatable. Whether or not that will protect you from the fallout that ensues and the nuclear winter that comes after, there's nothing there. There is, the bottom line is that we were confronted with, and I think the reality that our country is confronted with, is that there is no shelter. There is no real shelter. When they say seek shelter immediately, what they really are talking about is a shelter that will protect you from the blast and the fallout and the nuclear winter, that will provide you with water and food for years, because everything will be killed. The ability to grow food underground, seeds, enough to feed all of the people who need to find shelter there. This doesn't exist. So we find ourselves in a situation where we face this great existential threat. We have these fancy alarm systems set up that tell us to seek immediate shelter. Missile incoming, this is not a drill. But there is no shelter. We face a reality of how our leaders have failed us, how they're very quick to spend more of our taxpayer dollars on building more of these nuclear weapons, tearing up the INF treaties like those negotiated by Reagan and Gorbachev, things that people during that time said would be impossible, but that were only made possible because of leaders who stood up and recognized that it was in the best interest of humanity in the world to de-escalate these tensions and begin to reduce the numbers of these nuclear weapons that have the ability to completely destroy our planet. That INF treaty is in the trash can. It no longer exists today. And when when President Trump announced his withdrawal from the INF treaty, immediately Russia announced the development of new nuclear missiles, and then Trump announced the development of new nuclear missiles, and now here we are, where our taxpayer dollars, trillions of them, are being spent to build these nuclear weapons in this nuclear arms race that is unwinnable, in a new Cold War that's making us and the world less safe. Here's the thing, and here's why we're talking about this. It doesn't have to be this way. It does not have to be this way. We have to recognize the problem and then take action to solve it. It requires courage. It requires leadership. It requires diplomacy. This is what is driving me to run for president. What we went through in Hawaii was the thing that ultimately made me decide that I had to run for president, to be able to serve as commander-in-chief, where this is my number one priority. Because the number one responsibility that the president has, that our government has, is to ensure your safety and security, right? If you don't have the peace of mind for yourselves and for your kids and for your families, that you can wake up every day, you can go to work, you can drop your kids off at school, you can come home at the end of the day and cook dinner and sit around and talk with each other as a family. If you don't have the peace of mind that you can live your life, what else do you have? Your safety and security is the number one responsibility of the president and commander-in-chief, which is why my number one priority, if elected, is to immediately call for a summit between the United States and Russia and China, these other nuclear-armed countries, with whom we are seeing tensions ever increasing, to begin to open up those lines of communication, to begin to de-escalate these tensions and restart the negotiations necessary to put back some of these treaties together. I think another thing that I agreed with Reagan on, he said, trust but verify. The reason why these treaties exist is because I'm not just going to go and say, oh, you said you're not developing these nukes. All right, I believe you, and then walk away. No, the whole point for these treaties, the whole point for the Iran nuclear agreement is it creates that platform to be able to verify, where you have inspections, you have agreements that must be abided by. There's another important nuclear treaty that will be expiring shortly after the next president is sworn into office in February of 2021, the New START Treaty. It took a lot to be able to put this treaty in place, and unfortunately this administration has made no moves whatsoever to begin these negotiations necessary to extend the deadline, to extend and renew this New START treaty. This is something that would be a priority of mine. If we don't deal with the existential threats that we face, we can't deal with any of the other issues, the challenges, the everyday issues that affect all of us in our everyday lives here at home, both because of the threat that we face to our existence, but also because we'll continue to see more and more of our taxpayer dollars being spent on more nuclear weapons than actually being spent on things like healthcare, on things like special education teachers in our classrooms, on things like ensuring clean water for every single American, on things like affordable housing. There are so many different areas where we really do need to invest resources to ensure the well-being of our communities, to strengthen our economy, to make sure that we're leaving behind a better tomorrow for our kids who will come after us. But unless we deal with this existential threat and the cost of these unnecessary wars, whether it be regime change wars or this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, we won't even be able to begin to have the resources we need to serve the needs of our people here at home. The most important responsibility the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. There's so many different issues that require Congress and the president to be able to work together to pass legislation. I think we'll talk about some of those issues here in our conversation tonight, but uniquely, the president is responsible for setting our foreign policy and leading by choosing diplomacy over war. This is what I seek to do to serve as your president. This is why I'm running for president and not staying in Congress, because I know that with my experience serving in Congress now for 7 years, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, meeting with world leaders, serving on the Armed Services Committee, and closely getting briefings from and exercising oversight over the Department of Defense, working with different military commands in the world, serving on the Homeland Security Committee, committed to ensuring the safety, security, and freedom of the American people. I have that depth and understanding around these issues of foreign policy and national security, combined with my personal experience as a soldier, now serving almost 17 years, understanding through my 2 deployments to the Middle East in a very personal way what the cost of war is, preparing me to be able to walk in on day one, to fulfill that responsibility, to serve you as commander-in-chief, and to bring about this peace of mind that unfortunately we do not have today. Work to end these regime change wars, this new Cold War and nuclear arms race, and change our priorities, bring about this sea change in our foreign policy so that our priorities are really focused, yes, on our national security, and on ensuring that we are working every single day for the best interest of the people, all the American people. For so long, we have seen this drain on our taxpayer dollars. I hear a lot from folks who say that, well, maybe I wouldn't be so opposed to taxes if I knew they were actually going to help our communities, if they were actually going to take care of the needs we really have, that's what we've got to change. That's what we've got to fix. It's not going to be easy. There's a lot of people who are making a lot of money from building more of these nuclear weapons. They're pretty opposed to seeing their profits go down, unfortunately putting profits ahead of peace. But there is nothing more powerful than our voices, than when we, the people, stand up, working side by side, and ensuring that our government is of, by, and for the people. And I'll close on this note, because we just celebrated the legacy and the life of Dr. Martin Luther King a few days ago, earlier this week. And the example of the work that he did, the leadership that he provided, and the light that he carried through a very dark time in our country's history still shines brightly today within every single one of us. You know, he was not as popular then as he is now. Our own government was working to undermine him, illegally surveilling him, calling him a communist, trying to undermine and smear his character as though he was un-American. When you look at the challenges that he faced, and yet the progress he was able to make, because he led with love and with care and with light and with the truth. This is the inspiration and the reminder, I think, that we all need now as we look to see how do we get ourselves out of where we are today. How do we heal the divides that exist in our country? How do we come together once again as Americans, working together, bringing the diversity of our ideas to the forefront, and recognizing that these issues that we face, that we have far more in common of concern than we may realize, and that our power and our ability to overcome these challenges, it lies within our own hands. It lies within our own hearts, in our ability to care for one another, working side by side to truly usher in a new era for our country, a new era that ensures that peace and opportunity and freedom for every American. We deserve it. Our time is now. We cannot afford to wait. These headlines that are coming out today are further proof that we cannot afford to continue to kick the can down the road and say, well, maybe somebody else will fix it. They're not. The problems are getting worse. The challenges are getting even greater. This is not a sad message. It's a reality check. It's a reality check. That's what it is. And those reality checks are important to make sure our feet are firmly planted on the ground so that we can stand tall and stand strong and say, all right, let's get to work. This is our fight, and it is the fight for our lives. It is the fight for our future. It is the fight for our planet, making sure that we have one, both for us, life as we know it, those who will come after us, the countless generations who will come after us. So there is so much at stake. You understand this, which is why you've chosen to spend your time here with us this evening, and for that I am so grateful. And it is because there are people just like you coming together in rooms like this across the country that I really do have hope. I really have hope. I have hope because of who we are as Americans. And I know what we are capable of accomplishing when we stand together and when we stand united. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you for joining this conversation tonight. Thank you. We've got a couple of mics. We'll be running around. If you have a thought you'd like to share or a question you'd like me to address or to answer, I just ask if you wait for the microphone. Yes, sir. We'll bring one over to you. so that the cameras and everybody can hear what you've got to say.
It's all right. I got it. Oh, you got it. Okay. He's got it. I'm just curious, since you've been to the Middle East, what the heck do we do there? That's the simplest question that I can come up with. I mean, it's not simple, but
Yeah,
it's just such a mess.
it is.
Is there anything we can do there?
Your question is appropriate because sometimes the right answer to that is no. Sometimes the answer may be yes, but it depends on the situation that we're dealing with. If you look at, President Trump has wrongly made a decision to put our country in a position where he has chosen sides in this centuries-long sectarian conflict that's been going on between Shia and Sunni Muslims across the Middle East, that today is largely represented by the ongoing conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That is not something that serves our country's national security interests. In fact, it undermines it. We see how his recent actions have opened up the door for terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda to begin to reconstitute themselves, and more likely they will be in a position to mount a resurgence because of that. Our troops in Iraq right now, whose mission authorized by Congress they are there to fulfill, was to try to prevent that resurgence. Instead of doing so now, because of this escalation of war with Iran, they have now been forced to redirect all of their efforts towards mounting a defensive position against Iran or Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. I think that's one example. In Afghanistan, we've got to get out. This is something that I have called for years, from my very first campaign that I ran for Congress back in 2012, because I saw and recognized that there was no clear mission there that served our country's national security interests, and that our troops should have come home long ago. There are tribal conflicts that have been going on in Afghanistan for generations. We in the United States, nor any other country, the Soviet Union went in and tried some things and failed. No other external force can go in there and try to dictate the outcome to these tribal conflicts that have been going on for a long time and are likely going to continue going on for a long time. Our troops should not be there getting caught in the crossfire in those ongoing conflicts. There's a corruption in the government there. There are issues there in Afghanistan that only really the Afghan people can work to resolve. It's not a pretty or quick or painless process. But just as our country went through our own finding of our way to become the country we are today, similarly, there are countries like Afghanistan that are going through their own changes and reforms that they need to see in their own government, and only they can figure that out. The question about, okay, well, what role do we play then, is an important one. I do not advocate, I'm not an isolationist. I don't think we just say, okay, we're going to bring everybody back home, turn our back on the world, and just bury our head in the sand and pretend that nothing else is going on outside of our house, because it's not true. If you look at the situation in Afghanistan and the national security interests we have, we should continue to strengthen partnerships with countries like Afghanistan, but recognize also that our security threat, the reason why our troops went there in the first place was to go after Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda after 9/11. That interest remains, but having an indefinite occupation in Afghanistan by our troops is not the best way to accomplish that objective. Al-Qaeda has largely been, I don't know, they've moved out of Afghanistan or they've been largely defeated in Afghanistan. If it turns out that there are some Al-Qaeda cells that start to pop up there again, we can send in special forces units, take out that threat, and get out. There are smarter ways to be able to take out the threats that we face that do not require endless wasting of taxpayer dollars, as we're seeing in Afghanistan right now, and needlessly sending more and more of our men and women in uniform into harm's way. Just in Afghanistan alone, we are spending $4 billion every month. 4 billion with a B every month. I looked it up a couple of days ago to see, okay, how would that apply here to New Hampshire? And I saw that your annual statewide appropriations budget is roughly $6 billion. Roughly $6 billion. So about 6 weeks in Afghanistan pays for your annual appropriations for your entire state. So when you think about, well, what could we do if we brought our troops out of Afghanistan and stopped spending all this money there? There's a whole long laundry list of things when you look at what 6 weeks in Afghanistan could fund here in New Hampshire for an entire year across your entire state government. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about the cost of war. So there's different situations across the Middle East, but I think really, without driving into the details of every country's in a little bit of a different situation. I think really the point is that as president, I would make these decisions about when and where our troops get involved based on our country's national security interests, always knowing that there has to be a very clear, achievable objective that does serve our country's interests, and therefore, you know what you're trying to accomplish, and you can get out once you've accomplished that mission. And it has to be achievable. I think this is what we have not seen for a very long time, unfortunately. The second thing is just recognizing the strength and the power of diplomacy. I think for too long, our foreign policy has really been one of trying to be the world's police. That does not serve our interests, nor is it an achievable objective. And so instead of running around the world with kind of the bully stick, I will lead with a foreign policy that's focused on cooperation rather than conflict, recognizing that the only alternative to diplomacy is war, and war must be a last resort, honoring the service and sacrifice of our troops, making sure that the missions that they are sent on are really worthy of that great sacrifice, and really understanding, for me in a deeply personal way, what the cost of war is and why diplomacy is so critical.
You can help me clarify a point.
Hold it right up there, sir.
Oh, you
Perfect.
can help me clarify a point that I've never been completely clear on.
Sure.
And that's the Iran nuclear deal.
Sure.
Now, as I listen to candidates all over the state, they talk about what they're going to do on day one. The first thing they're going to do is, whatever they're going to do on day one. The Iran nuclear deal, the question that I have is it a treaty? If it were a treaty that had been ratified by Congress, would it be as easy? I guess the law is not clear as to whether presidents can unilaterally withdraw from a treaty. I guess Bush withdrew from one of the arms control treaties. But nonetheless, if you get Congress's backing, that means that there's popular support for it. But given the dysfunction in Congress, I guess my question is should it have been a treaty? Is it possible the way we weaponize issues, is it possible to educate the public to a point where you could actually negotiate a real treaty, some of the things that you're talking about, which I do support? Or do you just go off and do it by executive order so that when you're replaced in the White House, they can easily undo it?
Yeah. That's a really great question. If I forget one of I think each of them are important. If I forget one, remind me. But it was not a treaty. And I think that the administration didn't feel that they could get the support. I might be wrong here, but I think it was of the Republican Senate at the time to ratify a treaty. And so went the route of a multilateral agreement. I think it potentially could have been much stronger and less easily eroded if it were a treaty, but that would depend on what was included in the treaty. The INF treaty was a treaty, but there was nothing in that treaty that required the president to go back to Congress for approval if he saw fit to get out of the treaty, which is why he was able to do it unilaterally on his own. So I think it depends on the conditions in the treaty that would determine that. What am I missing? How to break through the gridlock, you know, going back into this and saying, okay, we've got to get back into this agreement, whether it's the Iran nuclear agreement or any of the other treaties that we're talking about. Look, the strongest position is to be able to build that popular support that can break through the hyper-partisan gridlock in Washington, where leaders are in a position where they have to do what their voters want them to do. Imagine that. I think that's really the best objective to be able to accomplish these things. And I think it's a mistake that we've seen happen in the past with different presidents who may have popular support for different issues on the campaign trail, but once they get elected, they kind of go inward in the Washington bubble and don't continue the kinds of conversations and connections with people across the country that we're developing here throughout our campaign. And that's a problem on a lot of levels, because it just further deepens that disconnect between Washington and everybody in the country who's going about and living their lives. And it fails to recognize how, what I just talked about, the power for us to be able to make real change and systemic change in this the paralysis that Congress has been dealing with for a long time because of hyperpartisanship. That can only happen when people like us get together and make it happen. I want to ask if you can show your hands. I think it'll be very telling here in this room. Raise your hands if you're a Democrat, if you identify as a Democrat. Okay. Raise your hands if you identify as Republican. And raise your hands if you identify as independent or libertarian. This is what I'm talking about. This is exactly what I'm talking about. That fellow Americans can come and sit together in a room with respect for each other, understanding that even as we may have differences on policy or how we solve problems, we come together as fellow Americans, rooted in the bedrock of our Constitution, recognizing that if we ever want to see these problems solved, we've got to work together. And so that's the approach that I would take as president. Yes, sir.
I have more of a statement about Washington lately.
Sure.
There's an old Greek saying, it goes of absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's what I'm seeing in Congress. That's what I'm seeing in power. We have to stop like term limits and stuff like what I'm seeing right now. Also, they're not serving the people; they're serving each other.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Perpetuating a broken system. I agree with you on that, and I think serious campaign finance reform has to be at the heart of being able to break through that, because you know, there's this pay-to-play culture in Washington, as you said. It feeds into each other, where you have a government of, by, and for the powerful elite, rather than a truly representative government of, by, and for the people. How you have people who walk in, maybe as middle-class Americans as a member of Congress, and walk out several years later as multimillionaires, I think is evidence of the problem. Yes, ma'am.
How do you feel about them building the wall for separating Mexico and stuff?
What's your name?
Annabelle.
Why is that important?
Because my daddy's from there, and I have family who lives there.
Do you get to visit them sometimes?
I went last year with my daddy.
Oh, nice. Did you like it there?
Mm-hmm. Super duper warm.
Super duper warm. Thank you for your question, Annabelle. This is a very important issue, especially to people like you who have family who live in Mexico. Trump's wall from sea to shining sea is a big problem. It doesn't solve any problems. I think it creates more problems. And as we talk about the use of taxpayer dollars that is not the best use of taxpayer dollars. And I think it skirts past, it overlooks really what the issue at hand is, which is twofold, in my opinion. One is the need for some serious, comprehensive immigration reform, dedicating resources to the judges and administrators who are working at the border to be able to help process those claims and those who are coming and seeking asylum in our country, as well as dealing with the broken legal immigration system that we have that's largely driving so much of the immigration challenges that our country is facing right now. And the second issue is border security, that as a nation, we don't really have a country if we don't have secure borders. But as we acknowledge that, we should ask ourselves, well, what's the best way to accomplish that? What's the most effective way to do that? Building a wall from one end of the country to the other is not the answer. In some areas, we've got great technology, we have many resources and innovations that can help us better achieve that goal by spending less money and ultimately making it so that it's something that actually works towards our interests. There's a lot of different issues that we have to resolve within immigration reform that have to do with, that if resolved, will help strengthen our families, make it easier for family members, maybe who live in other countries, to be able to visit each other, strengthen our economy in a number of ways, strengthen our educational system. There's a lot of opportunities there that are, unfortunately, we are missing as a country because we're not solving the real problems. Instead, we have a bunch of people yelling and screaming at each other, but no problem's actually getting solved. So that's what I hope to change. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Tulsi, when you started talking
Sorry, one
evening,
sec. Yes, sir.
Oh. When you started talking this evening, Tulsi, I thought you were going to put the total emphasis of your initial comments on climate change. And then, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but then you seem to shift to nuclear proliferation, which is a huge problem, and it has been since the 60s and 70s and onward. And we haven't advanced too much when we were negotiating with the Soviet Union. I happen to feel climate change, introduced in more modern times by Clinton's Vice President Dole, not Dole.
Gore.
Dole ran against him, Gore, thank you. I thought he hit the nail right on the head, and I think we've seen that since then. I hope you will continue to put a lot of emphasis on climate change and not forget nuclear proliferation. In your role as congressperson from Hawaii, I'd like to ask you, and if you can answer it as clearly as possible, a question that I know you've been asked in recent weeks, but why on the 2 articles of impeachment against the worst president in my lifetime did you say present on one of the articles and you voted for the other article? Could you explain that?
I actually voted present on both.
You voted present on both?
I think one of your members of Congress here in New Hampshire voted in the way that you're talking about. I don't remember which was which, but I think that may be what you may be remembering. I made this decision very carefully. Impeachment under any circumstances is a very serious matter, and ultimately made my decision because of 2 things. Given this hyper-partisan environment, I long for years have been warning against an impeachment process driven by partisanship would only further divide our already very divided country. And so my vote was to very intentionally take a stand for the center, not choosing that either of those binary options, while simultaneously introducing a censure resolution that actually included many more of the abuses and acts of wrongdoing that I believe this president has done, increasing the possibility that that would gain bipartisan support, while still ensuring that it will be the voters at the ballot box who ultimately make that decision to remove Trump from office. Trump is not innocent of wrongdoing. There is a whole list of things that I've been very vocal throughout his administration on that have not only been wrong, but have been unconstitutional. My goal is to see Trump removed from office. I'm running for president to do just that. And my concern about this impeachment process that I think many people on both sides of the issue acknowledge is a very partisan process, could increase the likelihood that it's harder to defeat Trump in this election, increase the likelihood that his support continues to strengthen, he raises more money, increase the likelihood that the House Democrats lose that majority to Republicans, increase the likelihood that the Senate remains in Republican hands, potentially creating an outcome where you have a Trump re-election and a Republican Senate and House. This is something that, for me personally, I think would be pretty disastrous for the country.
The only follow-up I would like to ask you is, in my small little head here, it's about the only part of me that's small, but in my head, a present vote is no vote at all. There are times to make statements and times not to make statements. And I think, and in all due respect, because I do respect the campaign that you're running overall, but I think you abandon your responsibility to the good people of Hawaii by voting present instead of not casting a vote representing all the people.
Thank you. Obviously, respectfully disagree, and there's a reason that that vote is an option, and it's not one that I've maybe used it only once before, and made that decision very specifically to make a statement without my position being hijacked by either side in this partisan situation. So I appreciate you asking the question, and we may agree to disagree on this one, and that's okay. Thank you.
So you've been the most outspoken candidate against foreign intervention probably in the last 50 years. Now, our most recent being the war in Iraq, started in 2003. If we go back to 1991, afterwards, George H.W. Bush left the Kurdish people alone and said, take over Iraq yourself, overthrow Saddam. Afterwards, we left them alone to be gassed by the very nerve gas that we sold them in, I think, the 70s.
Sold.
Yeah,
Saddam.
sold to them. So in, I think it was 2018, or it might have been this year, Trump pulled again out of Kurdistan and left them to be slaughtered by both the Iranians and the Turkish military.
The Syrian Kurds.
The Syrian Kurds, correct. Would you offer, as president, any reconciliation to them as a matter of diplomacy? And would you also recognize them as a free state?
So reconciliation is, I mean, really it's about being pragmatic, about acknowledging the past and recognizing the challenges that Kurdish people face everywhere. Syrian Kurds should not be mistaken with the Iraqi Kurds. I think we saw President Trump make a pretty big mistake. Was that earlier today or yesterday in not seeing that distinction. Syrian Kurds have a lot of differences with the Iraqi Kurds and have sometimes even been on opposite sides, and there are Kurds in other parts of the Middle East who also have different concerns. I think it's important to recognize they're not a monolithic people. I've met and worked very closely with both the Iraqi Kurds, gone to Erbil, have met and worked with the leadership of the Syrian Kurds, the Syrian Democratic Forces. And ultimately, what each of them are looking for is self-determination and the ability to have some level of self-governance. Being able to help support those negotiations that would need to occur for that to happen, I think is the best role that the United States can play. And unfortunately, leaders of our past, not only the actions Trump took in really setting up the Syrian Kurds for failure in every step of the way, but also the policies that that we've seen our government take towards the Iraqi Kurds as well, have not helped them to have a fair negotiation with the Iraqi government, and Syrian government is a different situation. So I think that's really, as we look to how can we help to thank the Kurds for the great sacrifices that they have made as the most effective ground fighting force against ISIS in Syria, for example, is to see how we can best serve as a mediator for them to be able to conduct the negotiations they need with the associated parties to bring about the constitutional reforms and changes that they're fighting for. It would be wrong for us to go in and say externally, well, I'm going to support statehood, or I'm going to support this or that, because that would create undue external influence into what are very domestic matters in those countries, and I don't think would be helpful for the Syrian or for the Kurdish people in each of these situations.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. A lot more. We'll see if we can take as many as we can.
Thank you, Tulsi. And thank you for the reality check that you gave us. I want to bring this back to a situation that is very prevalent in our state, and that has to do with prescription drugs. And I would like to know, if you were elected president, what is the first thing you would do to lower drug prices?
Thank you very much, Karen. It's great to see you both here, and thank you for the advocacy that you and so many other volunteers for AARP are doing across the country to bring this issue to the forefront, the issue of this greed-driven healthcare system and how big pharma and big insurance are profiting off the backs of sick people in this country. This is what needs to change. Number one, big pharma and big insurance industries will have no place at my policy-making table. My campaign is a people-powered campaign, and we take no money from PACs or lobbyists or corporations. So there will never be a doubt in any one of your minds about whose interests I'm serving. My sole commitment every single day waking up is to work for the well-being of the American people, number one. Number two, we've got to lift the prohibition of Medicare that currently does not allow them to negotiate lower prescription drug prices. The fact that we, the people, through our government, are the number one purchaser of prescription drugs in the world, have, through our own laws, tied our hands behind our back, taking this leverage away from us to be able to lower prescription drug prices with big pharma, is one of the most egregious examples of this pay-to-play culture that I'm talking about. We have a situation where big pharma as an industry spends far more on PACs and lobbyists in Washington than they do on those television ads that we all see on TV. And what does that tell you? We know TV ads are expensive. They spend a lot of money to market these drugs and try to present a very rosy picture about what they do. Just as long as you don't read the fine print and you don't actually listen to what the guy is saying, they spend more money on buying a seat at the table to make sure that they get these kinds of provisions written into the laws that our representatives in our country pass. It is unbelievable, and it would be unbelievable if, unfortunately, it wasn't so true. The third thing, we need to end the patent parking practices of big pharma where they get a patent for 7 years for a drug that they produce. After that, normally what's supposed to happen is the patent expires and generic drug companies can go in and produce these drugs at a much cheaper price for consumers. So then at least you have a choice. You can choose the generic or you can choose the brand drug. But instead of allowing this process to play out as it should, they tweak one little component so that they can then restart that patent clock and run it out for another 7 years, once again blocking us as consumers from seeing cheaper drugs. Number 4, we've got to allow for the reimportation of drugs from countries like Canada. This is already happening by necessity, where more and more people who are seeing their loved ones rationing their medicine because they can't afford it, or children who are in need of insulin for their diabetes, they're convoying up to Canada or to Mexico to be able to get the very same drugs that they cannot afford here at home and buying them in bulk to tide them over until they make that next trip. As I'm describing this, it makes it sound like we're describing some other country other than our own, which is exactly the problem and speaks to the systemic change that we need to see fixed. Thank you. I'm going to try to squeeze in a couple of more questions here. Yes, sir.
So recently there have been talks about how the global carbon budget has about 9 years left, a little bit over, and globally about 42 gigatons of carbon are emitted a year, and the US is like the second largest emitter. As president, what would you do to cut down the emissions of our country?
Thank you. This is an important question and linked to the concern that you raised, sir. And yeah, you can clap for that because it's a serious issue. We're hearing more and more this talk about climate change. It is rightly bringing focus into some serious environmental threats that we face and how both our policies and even some of the decisions that we make in our own lives are having a very direct impact on those numbers that you're talking about, which points to the action that we need to take to fix it and to change and recognize that time is not on our side. There are serious changes that we need to make to our policies here at home, having to do, in my view, with two major areas: fossil fuels and agriculture. Agriculture doesn't get nearly enough the attention it should, given how so many of the kind of monocrops and multinational agribusiness practices are emitting a huge amount of carbon into our environment. What to speak of how they are polluting our water systems and our air and eroding soil quality, taking away our ability to ensure we can grow food to feed our people in the future. So every 5 years in Congress, there's a farm bill that's passed, and when you look at the farm bill, it's made up of a lot of subsidies and giveaways and preferential treatment to the very same farming practices that are increasing the threats to our environment, rather than doing what we should. And this is what I'll lead as president, is this move away from the farming practices of the past that are really not helping local farmers, but are instead lining the pockets of massive companies like Monsanto and Syngenta and others, and instead really investing and empowering local and regional farmers, people who are growing food to feed people that they can actually get in their cars and drive that food and deliver them to, whether it's within a state or within the region. Number 2, incentivizing more information and awareness around things like regenerative farming that really does have the ability to not only sustainably farm, but recapture an incredible amount of carbon from the environment. There's a lot of other things that I think we need to do there. I'll just mention on fossil fuels. Obviously, we need to seriously and finally make this transition off of our addiction to fossil fuels and quickly usher in a new green energy economy. There is incredible innovation and excitement around many different ways that we can produce clean, green energy, create good paying jobs, strengthen our economy, finally have energy security in this country, and also bring down the cost of energy that we are all paying as Americans in this country. It's a win-win-win-win on every single level. So why haven't we done it? Pay-to-play culture in Washington. Big oil has a huge amount of influence, especially in kind of the old school network of politicians in Washington across both party lines. I've been outspoken about our own party's wrongdoing in switching their position, I think it was a year or so ago, saying, well, we will take money from big fossil fuel corporations again in the DNC. How you can say that our party is championing the issue of environmental protection and climate change with one hand, while the other hand saying, all right, we'll take your money. Maybe we aren't so serious about it after all. It's about walking the talk, and it's about, as voters, holding leaders accountable, because anyone can come in and say, hey, yes, I'm serious about climate change. Okay, what are you actually doing? What actions are you taking, both as a policymaker, but also in your own life? Because really, there's big changes that we can make together when we think in our own lives, how can we have a better impact on our environment and those around us? Diet and nutrition plays a huge role in this, and it's a tough conversation because, it's food, it's what we eat, it's what we choose to eat. But when we look at countries like Brazil, the #1 exporter of beef in the world, and we worry about the Amazon being destroyed, the two are directly linked together. So if we reduce the demand, encourage more nutritious and plant-based and whole food products, not only are we increasing the health of our bodies, but we're increasing the health of our planet. Last thing I'll say on this, foreign policy is domestic policy. As president, yes, I will work to re-enter the Paris Climate Accords, but also am under no illusion that that will somehow be like, all right, we did our part and then move on. No. This is a global crisis that requires global action, and why it's so critical, once again, to be able to work with other countries, exercise diplomacy, even those countries who we may have had adversarial relationships with or with whom we have very serious differences with. We also have areas of shared and common interest, like climate change, that require strong leadership and global partnerships if we're serious about addressing the threats that we face. Thank you. We don't have time for any more questions. This is my sister. She is my timekeeper. She's yanking me now. I'm sorry we don't have more time. I'm so happy to see all of your interest. I'll be able to stick around for a few minutes. I've got to do a TV interview in the next room shortly after this. So if you would like to come up and say hello or take a picture, we are going to be lining up on this side of the room. Before we do that, before you get up, I want to ask you to hold fast for just a second. And Election Day is 19 days away. I don't know whether to be happy or sad about that. 19 days away. We came here to New Hampshire over a year ago when we started our campaign. It was last winter, and I remember being freezing cold then, just like I am now. And here we are. We are 19 days away. I will be here for the vast majority of those 19 days, holding town halls like this across the state, meeting with your fellow New Hampshire voters everywhere we can. We're going snowboarding. We're having a town hall going snowboarding on Tuesday. If there's any snowboarders or skiers here in the house, he's coming. But we're going wherever people are and bringing this message that you've heard here tonight about the kind of leadership that I seek to bring to serve you as your president and commander-in-chief. Your decision that you have before you is very important for all of the reasons that we talked about, as well as the reality that you know that as New Hampshire voters, your choice will send a message to Washington and to the nation about the direction you would like to see for our country. And so as you're leaving tonight, as you think about how you're going to vote, I ask you to really consider that and think about what kind of message you want to send. I appreciate so much about New Hampshire voters that you're independent thinkers, that you don't listen to what other people tell you you should or shouldn't do, the pundits or the pollsters or whatever. No, never. And this is more of what we need in the country, where we're thinking really about what is in the best interest for our country, because this election is really not about what happens to me or to my future. It's about the choice that you are making about what you would like for your future, what you would like for your family, and the kind of country that you would like to leave behind. So to close, I want to ask one of our volunteers to come up and speak about what our People Powered campaign is doing here now for the final 19 days and how you can help.
Thanks, everyone. You'll find these Tulsi Can Count on Me pledge cards coming around. So when Tulsi came to Claremont back in November, I had the privilege of seeing her, and ever since then, I've been driving around with her signs, her pamphlets, talking to everybody that I can. I have all the, paraphernalia and things like that that I can pass out to anybody and just have those conversations. So part of what this card says is just talking to two people about what you heard tonight. I've continually said that Tulsi brings this message of hope, and I think she inspires hope in something that our country has needed. So just going out and talking to two people about what Tulsi is about, tweeting out what you hear, Facebook, Instagram, all of those, and just bringing about all of that positive stuff that Tulsi has to talk about. Also, showing up for events. This is probably the 5th event that I've been to over the past few months. Canvassing volunteer activities just locally, just so that you know, every Saturday we're getting together to go out and to canvass, sign wave, and things like that here locally. And they're also doing other things around the state as well. And the biggest thing, too, is come out for Election Day. So making sure that you come out for Election Day, grab your friends, get other people to come out and vote. Your vote does matter. Yes. It does count. Don't let anybody tell you that it doesn't. We have such power here in New Hampshire, and that's absolutely what I love about New Hampshire. So again, give what you can, do what you can, whether it's time, money, definitely, because there isn't the PAC money coming in. There aren't the huge donations coming in. Every dollar counts to help us get the word out about Tulsi. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your hard work. Thanks to you and our incredible volunteers. And this is where I really just want to invite you to come and join us. If you are leaving tonight, sure that you want to vote for me, thank you so much. There are a number of ways you can help. If you're leaving tonight and you're still not sure and you're still thinking things through, I still ask you to think of 5 people in your life that you can just share what you experienced here tonight. So that maybe if they said, oh, we've never heard of Tulsi, or we've never gone to a town hall, maybe that they can be better informed before they make this really important decision. Thank you again for spending your time here with us tonight. Have a great evening, and aloha.
I think it was in Hampton at the pizza restaurant, yeah. I'm Ian. Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah. Sorry, it's just she's right. Are you following the Gabbard campaign?
So I'm based in New Hampshire, so I've seen, and I actually saw.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Great to see you. Okay, good. We'll be around. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'm impressed. You went and got a picture.
We worked out.
Thank you. I know.
Wasn't that fast? Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm glad you don't have that cold that you had at the holiday
I know. That was terrible.
I heard you when you spoke
I
here
wouldn't
in
wish
town.
that on anybody. Thank you. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much.
Have a great night.
Keep supporting your sister.
Okay. Thank you. You have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here's your question. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Got it. Mom, you want one? Why don't you jump in? Give one to the three of us. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. First time. How you doing?
How are you? Nice to see you again. How are you? Okay, let's take a picture. Oh, video. Okay. All right.
I'm the founder of the New Hampshire Student Voice here in the state of New Hampshire.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if you could do a shout out to the New Hampshire Student Voice and all of the students.
Sure.
in New Hampshire.
I'd be happy to. Are you filming already? Go ahead. Shout out to New Hampshire Student Voice. Aloha. You are well represented, and appreciate you having this platform to be able to lift up voices of young people here in New Hampshire. Well done, sir.
Can you switch it to picture mode?
I can switch it to picture mode. Here we go. There we go. Oh, nope. There it is. 1, 2, 3. Got it. Awesome. Good work. Keep it up. Okay.
Hello.
How are you?
Very good.
Thank you.
Great. Let me just tell you, if there's any reason I'll come back to the Democratic Party, I love Ken. So,
Well, I hope you seriously consider it.
well, I am.
You can make a big difference.
And there are 2 points I want to make. I resonate with you because you say you're telling the truth. And there are 2 truths though that I don't think you know yet. What? You're not telling the truth about Israel. You're not telling the truth about the 9/11. I was in New York. I've done thousands of hours of research. You're not telling the truth about the 9/11 attack on Israel. So just think about that. Either have your people or yourself research a little more, particularly 9/11 in New York. I was there, and no one's addressing it.
Fair enough.
It was great to see you.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here.
Love you, Tulsi.
Have a good night. Love you too.
Hi, I'm Sean. Nice to meet you. I guess I'm the token Republican.
Are you?
I really lean
You weren't the only one.
I lean more libertarian.
Yeah.
I think the Democratic Party is doing to you what they did to Ron Paul in 2008. And I have a lot of friends. I'm from Montana, and I have a lot of friends that support your campaign. It's tired of these regime changes towards independence. Would you consider running third party? God forbid you didn't get the nomination. No. With even maybe a crossover ticket with Rand Paul or something. I think
It's not. I'm really interested in actually speaking to a position where I can do the job, and I do not do that to just run as a
I think it's going to be too late to be able to
in this election. I think that's like. Yeah.
Well, you've got my vote.
Thank you. I appreciate that. What's your name?
Dave Magnuson.
Thank you, Dave. 1, 2, 3. It's gonna happen.
Got it.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. Hi. Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Yeah, let's do it. Thank you. Thanks for all of your support. We're working hard. Thank you. Hi. How are you doing? Nice to meet you.
One of the Republicans.
Yeah, it's cool.
You got my
It's
vote
cool.
already.
Thank you.
Thanks
I
so much.
appreciate your support.
Ready? 1, 2, 3. Message came, but I think I got it.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Thank you
All right,
so much.
thank you, Dan. How are you? Nice to see you. I'm good.
Saw you in Grantham
Yes.
and brought my daughter this time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good seeing you again.
Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Did you have a good time? Thank you. Thank you. I'm grateful.
Thank you.
Appreciate your support. Have a good night. Thank you. How are you, Dave? Nice to see you.
2 hours. First political rally I've ever
Gosh.
been to.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Thank you. Where did you come from?
Massachusetts.
Okay.
Please.
I appreciate you making the trek.
Quick comment.
Yes.
Chris Gibson, former congressman.
Good friend.
Says his best.
He's a good friend. Wow, what a small world.
Yeah, it is.
Tell him.
Very well.
Give him a hug for me. All right.
1, 2, 3.
Wonderful.
Best of luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night. Hi, how are you? Good. Nice to meet you. I'm good.
1, 2, 3.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Ready?
How are you?
I was a Navy. I was in Navy about 20 years ago.
Oh, wow. Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service.
I'm grateful.
Take a photo of you?
Please, it's right there.
Thanks for being here tonight. You want to shake hands here? All right.
Thank you, ma'am.
1, 2, 3. It's video and photo.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night. How are you? Sorry we didn't get to your question.
No, it's fine. Don't
Nice
worry.
to
It's just
see
great
you.
to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. What's your name?
My name is Mark.
Thanks for coming, Mark.
It's just a great honor to meet you, Tulsi. You're, I mean, I have a lot of great things to say. I really am grateful for your service. I really thank you so much for your lifetime of service, and I know you will continue on. And, you're a remarkable inspiration for me, and I'm just extremely enthusiastic about your candidacy.
Thank you.
I think you're going to win. I really think you're going to win. You got this, and man,
We're working hard.
Oh,
We're
yeah,
working
totally,
hard.
you
It's
know.
a tough road, but people.
Sometimes you got to go through hell to get to heaven.
Thank you, Mark.
Stay strong, Tulsi.
Of course, I will.
1, 2, 3. Got it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so
I
much.
appreciate it. I'm counting on you to help us out.
Of course. Take
All
care.
right, thank you.
Keep up the good fight.
Thank you. Good to see you. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Great to see you.
I just want to say hello as usual.
Yes.
And that everything you're saying is really matters to me, because my mom's a teacher, my dad was a Vietnam veteran. I work on a farm about 20 miles from here, so it's we love you, and
thank you.
We just think that the word is getting out there, and we're feeling good about it.
Good. I'm glad.
And I'm going to go snowboarding on Tuesday.
Okay,
so
good. We'll see you there. All right. Have a good one. Hi. How are you? What's your name? Nice to meet you, Debbie. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for your support. It means a lot to me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
1, 2, 3.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good night. I appreciate it. Hey, good. How are you?
So I heard you on Joe Rogan. That's
Yes.
right. And I'm as far right as you can go.
Really?
And I'm pulling for you. Because 4 years ago I got a chance to whether I want to shoot my right foot or my left foot. Didn't have a good choice at all. So I hope you pull it off.
We're working hard.
Okay.
With your support,
Yes.
we can do it.
1, 2, 3. Got it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching the show and share it with others.
Definitely have.
Okay,
All
good.
guys working.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Hey, what's your name?
Chris.
Nice to meet you, Chris.
I met you in Claremont last time in November after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And my son was playing down in the pool, and I was trying to listen, but I was trying to keep an eye on him. And
Yeah.
I was glad I got to come tonight and listen.
I appreciate that you came back.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Sister.
1, 2, 3.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Really
Good luck. I
appreciate your
will come out.
support. Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Hey, how you doing?
How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet
One
you.
thing I want to say, firearms.
Yes.
So it's a very hot button issue. One thing that no one hears is the way of redemption, especially with red flag laws. There's a lot of gun owners that would be behind those, but there's no path to redemption, it sounds like. I think that would help a lot.
Path to redemption as
far
distinct
as-
from the due process on the front end?
On the due process on the front end, and if you are red flagged, and it does happen, how do you get them back?
That's a
How do
very
you get
good
your rights
point.
back?
That's a legit.
Nobody talks about that.
Yeah, fair enough. There's some legislation that's been introduced in Congress that I'm taking a look at, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I have not heard anyone else bring that up.
Exactly.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
1, 2, 3.
If it wasn't for Joe Rogan, I never would have found it.
All right, thanks, Joe Rogan.
How are you?
Thank you so much again.
Yeah, thank
I really
you.
appreciate it.
1, 2, 3. I'd love to chat with you sometime.
Yeah.
About veteran benefits.
Yes.
Because my uncle's going through this whole big thing with his Lyme disease, and it's such a hassle.
Wow.
So we gotta fix it.
When are you leaving tonight? Are you done or?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, once we're finished, I might try to grab you for a sec. All right. Thanks.
It's not that.
No.
1, 2, 3. Got it. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Thank you, Jen. It's
Thank
wonderful
you.
to meet you.
My mom loves so excited.
Heck yeah, why not?
And so I always tell them, you want a picture, let me know.
Yeah,
I know. Right on. Good.
1, 2, 3. Awesome.
Thank you,
And I
ma'am.
just want to say thanks for your service.
No, thank you for yours.
Thanks for being here, but thank you for your service.
Yes, absolutely.
Good deal.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Glad you could be here. All right.
Awesome. Okay.
C-SPAN's Campaign 2020 differs from all other political coverage for